Good afternoon. I'm Molly Young from the Miami University Alumni Association. As part of the Miami University Alumni Association's webinar series, we are excited to present a very popular topic, national parks, all you ever needed to know and more. Joining us for today's presentation is Dr. Tammie Gerke, teaching professor in the Department of Geology and Environmental Earth Science and the Department of Mathematical and Physical Sciences. Dr. Gerke has presented a National Parks lecture series with the Gardner Harvey Library on Miami's Middletown campus for the last 5.5 years. Her series this fall will focus on 3 of the 5 newest national parks, as well as presenting on her work at the 6th century BCE Temple of Apollonia in Albania. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. Questions were collected during registration, and Tammie is going to attempt to address some of those throughout the webinar today. You'll also have the opportunity to ask a question by clicking the button at the bottom of your screen. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tammie to get us started on our tour. Good morning, afternoon.
Afternoon, whatever it is. Thank you very much. So first of all, I want to let everyone know that's watching. If you have questions as the presentation's going on, please feel free to type them into the chat. And Molly's going to just jump in and ask the questions as I go. I do have the questions that people submitted. I'm going to hopefully answer most of them as I go through the presentation and try to answer some of them at the end. But don't hesitate to jump in and ask a question if it pertains especially to a given slide. That way then we can actually ask it real time where it fits in there. So without further ado, let me go ahead and get my slides started here. All right, so Molly, can they see my slide set now?
Not yet.
Okay, I had that set up. Let's try this again. So sorry, everyone. I'm used to using a different platform, and let's see. They should be able to see it now. No. All right.
Not yet, although I think these technical difficulties are just part of the landscape these days. No big deal.
All right. So everything we practiced, I am doing, and it does not seem to be working. What about now?
I see them. There they are.
All right. Okay. And when
they just went away.
Yeah, when I hit the hide button, they're going away. So I'm not going to be able to hit the hide button. So let's try this one more time. All right. So now can we see them?
I see them.
Okay. All right. We're just going to leave it as this. All right. So sorry, everyone. So my talk is entitled National Parks, All You Ever Wanted to Know and More. So for a quick overview, I'm going to give some general information about the National Park System, how to access the parks, how might you go about choosing which park or parks to visit, and then at the end, after all of that, I've got some fun slides of several of the national parks that I thought people might be interested in seeing some images and a little information about those. So some general information about the National Park System. A lot of people don't realize this, but Hot Springs National Park is the oldest protected area that is overseen by the National Park System today. It was established by Congress as the Hot Springs Reservation in 1832, but did not actually become a national park until 1921. The oldest official national park is Yellowstone. And the U.S. Congress and President Grant on March 1st, 1872, created Yellowstone, and this is a direct quote, as a public park or pleasuring ground for the benefit and enjoyment of the people. And it placed it under exclusive control of the Secretary of the Interior. And so this is another thing that a lot of people don't realize. The National Park Service was not established until, I believe it was 1916. Prior to that, the national park lands were overseen by the Secretary of the Interior. And we see evidence of that even today when we see park rangers in their uniforms. If you look at their uniforms, they look very similar to cavalry, military uniforms. And that was because the Army actually helped oversee these lands when they were initially established. And then August 25th, 1916, President Woodrow Wilson signed the act creating the National Park Service. The first director of the National Park Service was Stephen Mathers, we see here on the left, and his assistant, Horace Albright. And this image was taken in Yellowstone in the 1920s. Mathers actually was not able to maintain being the director. He became ill. Horace Albright took over for a while, and then Horace Albright also became the park manager at Yellowstone. He eventually ended up leaving the National Park Service and was really fundamental in a lot of the environmental acts and helped with the Sierra Club. Now, I was looking through a lot of the questions that people sent in regarding national parks, and there were questions for me, what are my favorites? And that gets really difficult to say. And part of the reason is that today the National Park System oversees 423 acres of land, over 85 million, areas with over 84 million acres in the 50 states, the District of Columbia, America Samoa, Guam, Puerto Rico, Saipan, and the Virgin Islands. Of these, only 63 are national parks. So if you have on your bucket list to try to see all the national parks, that's a fairly reasonable number to be able to get to. But getting to all of the lands that the national parks oversees, I think would be a much more daunting task. Of those 379 areas that are remaining, many of them are historic sites, national monuments, battlefields, preserves, recreational areas, seashores, parkways, lake shores, and reserves. So I think that to me gets really interesting. Some of my favorite are definitely probably not some of the national parks per se, but some of these other areas. So I had this part in the presentation, but there were some questions on different ways to access the parks. So if you are over 62, the best way is to get a senior pass. It's a lifetime pass. Last time I checked, it was $80 and then a $10 processing fee. It may have gone up again. But once you have this, it's good for the rest of your life, and these can be purchased online. If you are not of that age and cannot get one of these, if you're going to take time to see more than one national park in a summer or in a year, I really recommend getting the annual pass. The parks, especially the more popular parks, are getting really expensive to get into. The park system at one point was talking about from some of the more popular parks charging anywhere from $50 to $75 for a pass, where the annual pass, if you're going to see more than one, would be definitely the best way to go about that. If you've got young ones or grandchildren or nieces or nephews, if any one of them is a fourth grader, that is the best way to get into a park. The National Park Service has a special program for fourth grade students, and hopefully these links will work. And if you go out, and this is called Every Kid Outdoors. And on this site, it tells you exactly what you need to do. But the idea here is to get the younger generations really interested in all of these public lands and helping them to ultimately grow up to be stewards to help us preserve these lands for future generations. So there's a whole huge amount of information on here of how this works, how to get your pass, information on how to plan a trip, hit the road, a few things that you need to know when you go. So if you have a fourth grader in your life, this is most definitely the best way to go. Other ways to see the parks are different types of tours. Now, it was really interesting. I love riding the trains. I have had the opportunity to ride trains all throughout my life. And knowing now that Amtrak does trips to the national parks, I had included this, but I think someone actually had a question about what about trains to the parks. So let's go out and take a look at this site. Now, they're running a Black Friday sale early. So every once in a while, yep, there it goes. We get this advertisement that pops up. So if you go to the Amtrak site, and what I did was I just typed in Amtrak National Parks. They have all sorts of different options here. All right. And when you move over these, they tell you how you can get around, what parks they're going to see. And you can then click on this and get trip details. All right. And be honest, this is something that I'm really interested in doing, is riding the Amtrak and doing one of these loops. For us, out of our area, if you're in the Ohio area, you can take the Cardinal line out of Cincinnati Union Terminal and actually take Amtrak up to Chicago, and then you could actually transfer then onto the trains that you would need to do the rest of a trip. If you're looking for something a little more rugged, you can do some organized tours. REI actually does some tours, and they've got some just absolutely amazing options here. And the thing I really like about their website, they give you their member versus non-member price. Becoming a member is not very expensive at all. But under activity level, they give you a number. And if you click on the little eye, it gives you an idea of what your physical requirements would be for that particular trip. So depending on your level of fitness, they've got things from level 2 all the way up to level 4, I think is the highest. I was looking through this. So if you are into cycling, you can ride your bicycle through Death Valley. Nothing I would want to do during the summer. They've got some trips in here. Where did it go? I just saw it and it disappeared. This one here. They also have trips that are designed just for women. So if you want to try some outdoors things, you're female and you want to give that a shot, but you want to do it sort of just with other women, REI actually has some options that you can do that with. I actually was working with a small company called Learn International, and we were developing a 3-week, basically an adult learning trip that would explore the geology, ecology, and the culture of the Colorado Plateau region. And we were working on putting this trip together. So eventually, when this is available, this is something that I'm really interested in starting to do, is to lead trips to different national parks, clustering them together where we could actually learn a little bit, but also really enjoy the national parks. If you want to put together your own trips, the National Park Service has a general website that really helps you plan your visit. So in my presentation, I've got a whole section on how to find a park. They talk about passes, events, maps, and it gives you all sorts of really useful information here on how to put together your own trip. So they've got ones on national heritage or heritage travel. So this is another great place to get information before you head out on to the national parks. And then, and there was another question, and I wasn't sure if it was pertaining to bus tours within a given park or bus tours that go to the different national parks. I was at Mesa Verde several summers ago, and when we got there, they had guided tours. So when we got up to pay to get our tickets, I asked about the tours, and the park ranger was very kind and asked what our background was, what we wanted to get out of a trip to Mesa Verde. So when I'm not teaching geology, when I'm on breaks, I actually work as an archaeologist in Southeast New Mexico. And so, you know, having that combination, Mesa Verde, the main reason I was at that park was to learn more about the archaeology. And the park ranger was very kind, and they said, this is not a tour that would be of interest to you. And I thought that the tour was run by the National Park Service, and it turned out that it was run by a company that contracted with the National Park Service. So if you're looking for a tour and you go to buy tickets at a park, go to get access, and they're providing tours, if you want it to be something that's being led by the Park Service, you should ask, because that particular park does allow these tours, but it's by an outside company, not the park rangers themselves. And so for myself, I was really glad I didn't do that tour. And at Mesa Verde, they actually had a lot of park rangers that volunteer during the summer. They were either retired teachers, or this is what they did during the summer. That did amazing job giving lots of information as we went to the different cliff dwellings in that particular park. So I had a lot of questions. How do you choose a park? Or if you only had a few days, where do you go? How can you see decent number of parks in a shorter period of time?
So Tammie, I just want to interrupt because I did have a just recently submitted question related to access, and since we sort of haven't left that completely yet. So this question comes from Layla. She says, I understand the National Park Service needs funding to operate effectively. However, can we really say that our national parks are accessible for the general public when park entry fees have gotten so expensive? I would think that this may exclude a lot of lower income Americans from enjoying these spaces and places. What are your thoughts on that?
I have very strong thoughts on that, and they're not good about the way they're talking about increasing the prices. Our tax dollars pay for these lands. These lands have been set aside for everyone to enjoy, and pricing things that high, especially right now, you know, if a family can scrape together enough money to get there and then to charge that kind of money for access, that really bothers me and upsets me. So a friend of mine she plays the lottery. She says we're going to win the Powerball. What I personally, one of the things that I want to do ultimately is I would like to create a foundation where I work with school districts that are not in the well-to-do areas, and these trips would not be limited to the students that do really well, that I would be helping guide trips for any student at that school, you know, maybe a certain age group, where all the arrangements were made and everybody, you know, had the opportunity to go and see the parks. Because there were a lot of questions about, you know, long-term survival of the park system. And I think the only way we're going to be able to keep that going is really instill in, you know, the younger generation how important these lands are. And we can't do that if they don't have access. I think the program for fourth graders to be able to get in for free is fantastic, but it's only for fourth graders. It's not all elementary aged or even high school aged students. So I'm not real happy that they're talking about increasing the price. I'll be honest, in certain parks, that would price me out of being able to go to the park.
Yeah.
So I do have really strong feelings about it. I don't think it's appropriate. And if our tax dollars are paying for it, we should have a certain level of access to those parks.
Right.
So
a legitimate problem with no good solution currently. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, I don't know if that cost may come down with way inflation's going right now. But that is something to keep in mind, I think. And that's why I think, especially there was several people that asked about traveling with young kids. If you're going to invest the money to go someplace, get that annual pass. That is the least expensive way to be able to get into a large number of parks in a period of time. And if, you know, working with school breaks and all, there may be more opportunity to see a higher number of parks. Now, when we say that's an annual pass to the national parks, that's not just the national parks, that's to any of the lands that have entrance fees to get in. So national monuments, battlefields, any of those areas, that annual pass would get you into any of those.
Awesome.
So that's one approach.
Some options.
Some options.
Great.
So, and anyone else, if you've got questions, please type them in. I love talking about the national parks, and it just seems weird I can't see you guys while I'm doing this and be able to get questions. So, all right. So several people were like, how do I pick some parks, or how do I pick an area to see parks? Outside of Washington, D.C., the highest number of national parks lands is in what we call the Colorado Plateau. Some of you may know this as the Four Corners region of New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, and Colorado. And there are a huge number of parks as well as smaller national monuments. And I have explored a lot of these in New Mexico, some of these in Arizona. I have to say, I have not been to a single national park in Utah. That was part of the reason for the Colorado Plateau trip, was that was going to allow me to get to see the parks in Utah. So this is an area that you can see a lot of these different things. Now, the challenge is out west, 400-mile drive is a short drive. So this area is a huge amount of land to try to cover. So that's something to keep in mind. My ex and I, we used Albuquerque as our base, and we were both willing to drive long hours. So we would, he lives down in Carlsbad, New Mexico. So he and I have our archaeology company. So when we get burned out on archaeology, we'll go up to Albuquerque and we use that as a base. And we just kind of drive out for the day across the top of New Mexico and have looked at a huge number of these areas here. On one of our trips, we drove up to Chimney Rock in Colorado. There was a 3-day archaeology workshop on how to make Pueblo style pottery. And that's part of what he has to do for his continuing education. Now, he had no interest in that workshop, but he knew I would. So he had signed me up to do that workshop. So we actually I made a cup. It sort of looks like a cup. And then we did surface treatment the way the Native Americans did. And we actually did a pit firing. But after that, we then went over to Durango, and we took the train up into Silverton. And he had been to Mesa Verde, and he's like, oh, it'll be crowded, we don't want to go. And it was like, I will throw a temper tantrum that a 2-year-old would be proud of if we don't go. And I had the car keys, so we went to Mesa Verde and came back through late at night. We've visited Chaco Canyon. I've gone to El Malpais, El Morro. Some of these areas here, people were asking about remote, but really interesting. These are fantastic areas to get to go see, especially if you've got an interest in archaeology. Petrified National Forest. The expressway goes right through it. You exit right off the expressway into the national park. Part of the park is north of the expressway. The other part is south. A lot of people are kind of surprised when they find out about Grand Canyon. The closest area to stay city-wise would be Flagstaff. But even once you get there, you've got about almost a 2-hour drive up to the South Rim, some of the more popular areas in there. So you want to think carefully, even if you're going to go out here. But if you have the time, this is the area where you can see the highest number of national parks lands outside of Washington, D.C. So I choose parks by things I like. Now, no surprise, I go by geology as my start point since I am a geologist. My area of expertise for my degrees is volcanoes. Things that blow up to me are really interesting. So I have had the opportunity to go to Hawaii twice. I've been to Yellowstone multiple times. I was in Seattle. I was told Mount Rainier was behind the clouds, but I could not see it the entire time. I was really sad, and there was no time to go out there. So this is how, like when I'm talking with my national park class that I teach for sort of an introduction to geology, we go through all the geology, then we start talking about the parks, And by then, my students have developed sort of an interest. So if you're interested in old mountain chains, the Great Smoky Mountains, close to our area, probably many of you have been there. If you're interested in newer mountains, Rocky Mountain National Park. It turns out that Acadia has a piece of an old landmass called Gondwana land. And pieces of Gondwana land are exposed at the surface in Acadia. So if you're a real science geek or paleogeography interests you, you can go to Acadia and you can stand on a piece of Gondwana land. If you're interested in caves, Mammoth Caves, fun little fact, from Middletown, Ohio, Mammoth Caves is 1 mile closer than Cuyahoga National Park. So I always thought that was kind of an interesting little fact that we could leave the state and get to a national park before we could get to one in our own state. Carlsbad Caverns, fantastic place to go. Not an easy place to get to though. Great Basin or Wind Caves, whoops, sorry. If you like geothermal features, so mud pots, geysers, right? A good place to go to see that is Yellowstone. You can see some geothermal there in Hot Springs. Folds and faults, geologic features, but Isle Royal. This is the largest island in Lake Superior. I've got some images for this park that I'll show at the end. Death Valley, the San Andreas Fault runs through there. There's a phenomenal fault system, sets of faults there in the Tetons. Glaciers, Glacier National Park, we can still see some glaciers there. Grand Tetons, I think there's still 1 or 2 small glaciers there, but you can see evidence of glaciers in Acadia, Yellowstone, and even at Isle Royal. So it depends if you want to see current glaciers or just areas that have been impacted by glaciers. Those would be parks that you could go to. If rivers are something you're interested in, Big Bend National Park, the Rio Grande River runs along one edge of it. Grand Canyon has the Colorado. Black Canyon of the Gunnison. Now, this is one I have not been to that is on my list. It is much more narrow than the Grand Canyon, not quite as deep, but because of its size, they say that there's areas in the valley floor there that only see sunlight for 30 minutes a day. They say you can drive down in there, but you've got to have a lot of experience four-wheeling, but you can hike down in there. I've done some driving, some four-wheeling, but there's no way I don't think I would drive down into that one. I would hike down into that one. If you're interested in sand dunes, the Great Sand Dunes in Colorado, or White Sands, which is now a national park. I still call it a national monument. It's one of the newer national parks. It became a national park in, I believe it was December 2019. But if you make it all the way to Carlsbad Caverns, if you just go up and over the mountains, White Sands is right on the other side. And about 25 miles south of Carlsbad Caverns, you can actually get to Guadalupe National Park. So the road coming out of Carlsbad, New Mexico is called the National Parks Highway because starting about 30 miles outside of Carlsbad, you hit Carlsbad Caverns and then Guadalupe National Park. If you're interested in fossils, White Sands has spectacular fossils there. I'm going to talk about that a little bit at the end. Yellowstone, Petrified National Forest, obviously Dinosaur National Monument, Denali, and Guadalupe National Park. And Guadalupe National Park actually has a trail that goes right up the front of the Capitan Reef exposure there that is actually called the Permian Reef Geology Trail. And you can get a guidebook at the visitor center, and there's approximately 30 stops as you hike up the front of this old Permian reef that points out a lot of the different sponges and different organisms that make up that reef deposit there. If archaeology is something you're interested in, Mesa Verde, most people know about. There's quite a bit of archaeology at the Grand Tetons, Petrified National Forest. There's archaeology at Isle Royal, and then Chaco. Most people call it Chaco Canyon, but it's actually Chaco Cultural Historic Park. If you're interested in history, Dry Tortugas, Acadia, Great Smoky Mountains, Gettysburg National Military Park. There's a lot of the military parks, especially in the eastern United States, that would be really interesting places to go to if you have interest in history. Stargazing. In the last few years, a lot of the parks have been applying for international dark sky status. And in a lot of these parks, that means they have to change their lightings. They have to have special shielding over certain lights. But these parks are established as areas where you can go and you're not going to have a lot of interference from light noise. When I used to fly out to Carlsbad, I would fly into El Paso. It's the largest city that's closest to Carlsbad, New Mexico. And once you get outside of El Paso, there's like one last road light, and that's kind of it. And we would get about 20 miles out of town and find some place to pull over. And this is what the sky there even looks like. It becomes even really difficult to find the basic constellations in these parks because we're just not used to being able to see these many stars in the east. And seeing the Milky Way out there is not an uncommon experience. This by no means is a list of all the parks that have international dark sky status, but all of the parks in Utah, Great Basin, Death Valley, Big Bend, Chaco Canyon, Petrified National Forest. If you start looking at these, you can see most of these parks are nowhere near any large cities, and that's what's made it possible for them to get this status. I believe it's at Bryce. They actually provide the opportunity. You can make arrangements, and there's a stargazing group. They take you out with the telescopes at night, and you can actually go stargazing with people that can help you find the different constellations and point all the amazing stars out in those areas. So let's say you've gone through this list and you've found the parks that you want to go to, but now you want to know a little more about the park before you get there. All the national parks websites look similar, but the problem is the information and where they hide it on their page is different from park to park. Some parks have huge amounts of information available, and other parks have, as I would call it, a dearth of information, and you have to go looking in other places. So I thought I'd show you a few of the national parks websites and the varying information that you can find and what kinds of things you might be able to find on a particular park's site. So Molly, while I'm doing this, I'm going to ask, have we had any more questions come in?
Well, yes, in fact, we have. So I noticed on that slide you were preparing that you had a little link to the Badlands website. And this person, Jill, she says she's interested in seeing the Badlands. Can you give me an idea of how many days we should plan to see this area? And you might be able to sort of expand that more globally to what's an ideal time frame to allow yourself at a national park.
Okay, so when we get to the Badlands Park site, I'm going to show each one of those. We can talk about that. It depends on the size of the park. So a park like Yellowstone is about the size of Rhode Island. Some of these parks are massive. Yellowstone actually is in 3 states. So what I really recommend is a lot of time up front planning before you go, because you don't want to get there and realize I need 5 more days, or I only needed a couple days here and I could have taken that time for another park someplace else. Grand Tetons and Yellowstone, it's like 30 miles between the 2 parks, but it can take you up to 2 hours to drive that. So parks, the larger parks, I would easily leave, 5, 6, 7 days. Parks like Yellowstone, unless you're staying in the park, it's quite a distance outside of the park to get to one of the local communities where you could have hotel or you're camping. So I think it's park specific. The larger the park, the more time. If you want to do any of the sort of backcountry hiking, then even more time. A park like White Sands, I would think a day. There is a 5-mile hike through the active dune fields here. My ex and I did do this. Unfortunately, he is not a morning person, and we were there in the summer. And it gets really warm out there. And I carried a lot of fluids for us, but even he and I, who had been working in the fields regularly, were acclimated to the weather and the elevation. We were pushing ourselves when we got to the end. If you're going to go to a place like White Sands, if you have the luxury, don't go during the summer. But the advantage of going during the summer, the other amazing thing he was able to get set up for us is during the summer months, if there went on the night that there's a full moon, they do a hike. It's a park ranger led hike out into the active dune field. Almost all the organisms that live there are nocturnal. And with the full moon, you don't need lights. The light reflects off that white sand. We did not have a problem seeing anything. But they open this up sometime in the spring, and there's 40 slots per hike. And he told me he just sat there and kept clicking the mouse until he got 2 slots for us. And so for me, going during the summer, getting to do that hike was well worth it. The closest town is Alamogordo. It's a small town, but right next to White Sands National Park is White Sands Missile Base. So there's a lot of military there. So Alamogordo actually has quite a bit available for accommodations and food. If you want to drive a little further, Las Cruces is to the west. And there's quite a bit to do in Las Cruces also. So that's why I would say for a park like White Sands, a day. So let's say you did pick White Sands. If you come here, and under every one of the parks, you're going to have a link that talks about plan your visit. And they'll have frequently asked questions, basic information. Here they have park ranger programs. So here's that full moon night, the full moon hike. So White Sands actually offers a huge amount to do. The problem with White Sands that I found, when they were a national monument, they had phenomenal information on the dunes and how they formed and the geology. And when they became a national park, a lot of that information seems to have gone away from their website. But as hopefully most of us know, what ends up out on the internet stays there. If you do some poking around and searching on the internet, you can actually find quite a bit of that. Because of where White Sands is, there's actually a lot of archaeology at that site, a lot of information about that pertaining to that park. So under people, they've got a lot of the different cultures. Spanish conquistadors moved through that region. If that's something you're interested in, they've got information on ranching and the Wild West, historic tourism, mining. So there's a lot there. If you go in April, the Trinity site is not that far from White Sands. And again, this is thinking in Western driving terms. The Trinity site is open one day a year. I believe it's April 1st. And so if that's something you're interested in, you could plan your trip around that. I'm typically looking for some geology information, things like that. So under nature, under geology, they have a little bit of information. And then they have like road closures. And I love this sign, road closed, missile test in progress, inquire at visitor center. When the missile base is testing, they close this park because they're not always sure where the missiles are going to end up. And to make sure that nobody gets hurt, they just close down this park because the missile base is literally right next door. If you do the 5-mile hike, as you come down off the active dune field, you come down along the front edge and you can see the fence between you and the missile base. And then you come back around and come back up onto the dune field there. So this park actually has a huge amount of information. I want to make sure we don't run out of time. So I'm going to jump to the Badlands since we specifically had a question about the Badlands. My tip to going to the Badlands is you want to be there at least a couple days. The rocks look different throughout the day. The colors that you'll see early in the morning are very different from the colors you'll see midday versus the evening. You want to be there for several days to experience that and to get photos of the rocks. The outcrops there are absolutely amazing. But if you're only there for part of a day, you wouldn't even notice that. You completely miss some of that natural beauty that is there. Okay. And so on this particular park, right up front, they've got a whole section on geologic formation. So they talk about why does it look the way it does? And I think doing some of this before you go helps us better appreciate everything we see when we're there. Okay. So they've got lots of information about that on this particular site. And if we go back, again, you can see plan your visit. They've got learn about the park under history and culture. So this one doesn't have drop downs like White Sands does. You've actually got to click on it. So they've got some information here about these things. Let's see, since we are running, I'm sorry, I forgot to maximize that. So I'm gonna skip Yellowstone. Yellowstone's website has massive amounts of information, but I would like to have a little bit of time to look at some of the fun images I put together. There was another question that talked about All Trails app. I have had mixed success with that app. And the other part of that question was, is that an app I would recommend? And what do you do when you're at a park and there's no cell service? This to me makes me very sad. Most of the parks have cell service in a lot of the areas because the general public doesn't seem to understand that a national park should not have cell service. And that is a place that we should be able to go and not be able to be connected to the outside world. Some of the parks have their own apps, and then the National Park Service decided that like Yellowstone had some phenomenal apps. And what ended up happening was they've combined them all together, and now they have a National Park Service app. So if you click on this, it tells you here, if you are an iPhone user, you can get it at the Apple Store. Android, you can get it at Google Play. A lot of this information about each of these parks you can find in the app. I am terrible about finding stuff on my phone, and it just aggravates me because I have a computer screen. Why would I do all of this on my phone? The huge advantage to having this app is that you can download stuff and let it work for you offline. So if you're going to do backcountry hiking or something like that, you can actually get your trail maps onto the phone. I'm old school. I take topographic maps with me and an old-fashioned compass because I just don't trust in these things working very well if you lose your phone, something like that. But the Park Service has actually gone to now one standard app. And a lot of this information that I'm showing that you can find on the websites, you can actually pull up on your phone if you wanted to use the app. All right. So, Molly, we'll take a quick break and see if there's any more questions that have come in. And if not, I thought I'd show some fun pictures of several of the parks.
Hey, Tammie. Sorry, Molly will be right back. We have a surprise guest visitor. Why don't you go ahead and continue?
Okay, no worries. Yep. All right. So I'll start with Yellowstone. One of my more favorite parks because of all of the geothermal volcanic things. A park that I would now never go to unless it was completely off season. This is one of the parks that has been completely overrun with people visiting. So the National Park Service has kind of become their own worst enemy. They have done a phenomenal job promoting everybody should go to the parks. Problem is that there's only a few of the parks that people seem to really want to go to, and Yellowstone is one of them. They say during peak season, traffic jams 6 to 8 hours long at times. This park I know has started a bus service, so you can park your car, get on the bus. The bus will take you through to certain areas and you can get picked up and get back to your car. Problem is the bus is just as likely to be stuck in these traffic jams as you are. So those are things, there were some questions about what are the best time to go to the parks. If you have the luxury, go during off season, go before all the secondary schools are out for the summer and parents are trying to take their kids. You'll be able to see more and move through the larger parks more easily. I showed this picture, and unfortunately, this is the north entrance to Yellowstone. This entrance is coming in from Montana. The corner block that was built, that this archway was built on, was actually put in place by Teddy Roosevelt. He helped set that cornerstone here. This is the entrance this summer that this road was the road that was damaged and washed away due to the flooding. And it turns out I had some geology majors that were at field camp this summer, and I knew they were going to Yellowstone, and they had been emailing and they had telling me how awesome they thought Yellowstone was. And I was so glad they got a chance to see it. They left the park a few days before the bad floods came in. Last I checked, part of this road is now open, but it's going to take years for this road to get completely reopened. There were places where it is just completely gone. You can get into Yellowstone through the south entrance, but there are times of the year that the south entrance is closed. So you want to keep track of those things, especially on these larger parks, so that you can get in coming from the direction that you're coming. Now, the National Park Series talks that I've been giving for Gardner Harvey Library, I've got people that have been coming from day one. And one of the people that had been attending sent me a link to a website where apparently you can leave Yelp reviews for some of the national parks. And people had left all these different reviews, and someone went in and made these posters based on Yelp reviews. So I included them because I think they're funny and they kind of make me sad at the same time that this is what somebody's walking away from our national parks thinking. But one person's thoughts were you could save yourself some money if you go to by not going to Yellowstone and boil water at home. Images. Like I said, I've been to Yellowstone a few times. These are the things to me that come to mind when I think of Yellowstone. Bison, herds of them blocking the roads, grizzly bears, the wolf reintroduction program, mud pots. Mud pots are one of my most favorite things. And if you've not been, I've got a little video clip, and we'll see if we can get that to play, and you can actually hear what the mud pots sound like. This is one of the lodges. Unfortunately, this lodge was damaged, if not completely destroyed, in one of the more recent forest fires that they had that hit the region. This is called Grand Prismatic Basin. This is the boardwalk. Problem is when you walk this boardwalk, you can't see the whole thing like this, but there is an overlook that you can get to and look down and see all of that. Some more images. Those of you that have been to Yellowstone have probably experienced something like this. And let's see if we can get this mud pot video to play. Now I'm going to jump this ahead to about a minute 45 here. Where was it? Somewhere in here. It gets pretty loud, so I wanted everybody to hear this. So just a little fun video of the mud pots. These are areas where all the volcanic ash from the different eruptions has gotten mixed with water, and there's these hot gases that are trying to escape, and they come up through this sort of slurry, and when the bubble breaks that sort of mud, you get that sort of plurp sound. If you've been to Yellowstone, I'm sure you are very familiar with that sound. And if you haven't, this is something that's just great fun to go see. Grand Tetons. Grand Tetons National Park, geology-wise, is really interesting because most mountain chains we think of form at a plate boundary where you've got two plates coming together. You get folded mountains. This is what we see for the Appalachians. Grand Tetons are what we call a fault-bounded mountain. So if you drive from here, from the east, to the Grand Tetons, it's flat, 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 and there's just this wall of mountains that just pop up out of nowhere. And that's because right along this edge, there's a huge fracture in the Earth's crust. And Jackson Hole, this flat area here, has dropped down relative to the mountains. And there are rocks that are up here in the mountains that they've drilled in Jackson Hole, and they have found them, and there's about 30,000 feet of displacement. That's how much this side has dropped down relative to this side. So if you've ever been to the Tetons, if you've ever driven from the east towards the Tetons, it is just an incredible experience because they just literally pop right up out of the Earth's crust there at you. This was the fun poster. All I saw was a lake, mountains, and some trees. Some old images. So I believe this is Roosevelt stumping there at the park. I found this old image, and you can really see the influence of the military on the national park uniforms, especially back then. Some other older images where the park rangers would survey the park on horseback, and, you know, the old entrance to the park there. Probably the three most famous buildings that are there at Grand Tetons. This is the Church of the Transcendental, I believe is what it's called. At the back of this church, there's a very small window, and it perfectly frames the main peaks of the Tetons. This church is still used for services on Sundays. During the rest of the week, it's usually open, and you can actually reserve this for weddings. If you like to fish in Jackson Hole, this is a Snake River through here. I'm not a fishing person. I've been told that requires that you need to be fairly still and quiet, and I'm just not able to be very still or quiet. But they say the fly fishing in here is absolutely phenomenal. So you can get fishing permits and you can fish while you're there. The Utah parks. Now, someone did, there were some questions about the Utah parks. Utah has 5 national parks, and they're here: Zion, Bryce, Capitol Reef, Canyonlands, and Arches. And I think one of the questions asked, what would be the best way to see all of these? The trip that I was designing for the Colorado Plateau, we were going to come in, see Zion, and then head over to Bryce. There's some back roads through here that are not the main routes, but you can get up into Capitol Reef, arch around into Arches, come down into Canyonlands. And if you want to see Mesa Verde, there's some small national park areas here, but you can come down into here, over into Colorado, and Mesa Verde is not very far over in this area here. So that is one route that you could possibly do and see all 5 of the national parks there in Utah. And I think this, so just some images from some of the parks there. So Arches, Nothing looks like the license plate. To me, I don't know about you, but that's the image on the license plate. That looks pretty similar to me. Some images from Arches National Park. So there's petroglyphs. I love black and white photography. And the amazing thing about the parks out west is you can see on a clear day for hundreds of miles. And it's just breathtaking. I find when I've been out west for long periods of time, when I come back east, I almost feel claustrophobic because I can't see very far. And there's a lot more vegetation here than there is out there. Images of canyonlands. Apparently somebody thought it was disappointing. More images of these parks. Chaco Canyon, the culture that lived there, they had structures throughout different areas in that region. And at Canyonlands, this construction is very, very similar to the construction of the pueblos that are in the cliff faces there at Mesa Verde. So this is also a Chaco culture type structure. So there's other places that you can see those. This is an overhead image of Upheaval Dome, which is in Canyonlands. There's a lot of debate. There's no definitive answer of whether this is a meteor impact structure or if this is the result of a huge salt dome that pushed the Earth's crust up and has eroded away. But that is something that you're able to see when you're there. Bryce. I loved this. Too orange, too spiky. I think it would be phenomenal to get to go hiking down in this area. That would qualify based on that poster as too orange and too spiky. So some images of Bryce. And you can see a lot of the topography looks fairly similar between some of these parks. Wanted to move things back east a little bit. So Isle Royale National Park. It is the largest island in Lake Superior, and the whole island is part of the national park. And if you look at it, you can see these lines that seem to trend the length of the island. And that's a function of the geology that's there. No surprise, there's no cell service and terrible Wi-Fi. Isle Royale, they do have some cabins. I think I've got an image here. Not real luxury accommodations out there at all. You can camp out there, but you want to make reservations in advance for those. The easiest way to get there, if you don't have a boat, you're not going to go out on your own. There are ferries that go out there. There's an 1.5-hour ferry up to a 6-hour ferry ride. The longer rides come out of Huffington, and you can actually, even if you just wanted to ride the ferry, which is fun in and of itself, you could ride the ferry out all the way around the island and then back for the day. Most of this national park is underwater, which I think is kind of a fun fact. It's not just the main island. There's lots of little islands associated with it, but the majority of this park is underwater. These are the cabins that you can rent and stay at. So if you're looking for something pretty plush, this might not be the park for you. There's lots of lighthouses out there. There's actually 4 lighthouses. And if you take the ferry, you'd be able to see all of those. There's a huge number of shipwrecks. Imagine that. So if you have dive equipment, if you are certified to dive, you can actually, in the park waters, go diving and explore some of these shipwrecks that are there. Acadia takes us all the way to the East Coast. Water there is ice cold. Well, anyone that's been in the Atlantic knows that the Atlantic Ocean usually is very cold. Some images from Acadia. This sailing ship, I grew up sailing. I love to sail. And I just love this image of this sort of ghost-like ship in the fog there off the coast. Cadillac Mountain. This is a place between November and March that if you go, it is the first place in North America where you see the sunrise. So if you are an early morning person and that is something that you would want to do, and Acadia, due to its proximity to Boston and a lot of the big areas on the East Coast, this is a park that I would also highly recommend that you go to during non-peak season. They have yet to start a bus service. I think there may be one now, but basically this is a park that closes its gates. You can't get in once all the parking lots are full, and they don't let anyone in until a certain number of people leave. So you want to make arrangements around, peak times. And a lot of the parks, and they're running into the same problem with the parks in Utah. And a lot of the parks actually on their websites, when you start poking at like frequently asked questions, they'll tell you peak hours of during the summer months of when people will be there, and you can plan accordingly to try to avoid those peak hours. The other really cool thing to me at Acadia is there's Bar Island. When the tide goes out, during low tide, there's a land bridge that comes out. Round trip is about 2 miles. The trail is only open for about an hour and a half before and during, and then an hour and a half after low tide. So I think it would be really cool to make arrangements to spend the night out on Bar Island, carry your stuff over there, walk across the land bridge, visit, you spend the night out there, and then walk back the next day. There have been cases of people driving over there and not timing it right and having to have their car towed back out of there because they got caught as the tide started coming in. There are lots of signs. This is really well marked so that you know. And if you went over there and got really absorbed and missed getting back in time, there's ferries that go back and forth. But I just think that would be something that would be really fun to do as part of a visit to Acadia. Figured we couldn't do a presentation on the parks if we didn't talk about Great Smokies National Park. Nothing specific to do. I've spent a lot of time at this park. I can always find something to do. I think one of the more interesting places in the park is actually Cades Cove. I believe the last family that was grandfathered allowed to live in there, the last of the family members have actually passed away. But Cades Cove is an area that there's a lot of history. There's old churches and cemeteries. There's some caves and sinkholes and waterfalls. So this is a place where you can see turn of the century as people were starting to develop that region of where they lived, how they lived as a community in there. Great bridges, old mills there. When I give a talk on caves, I usually do Mammoth Caves and Carlsbad Caverns together. Mammoth Caves are true caves based on geology. Carlsbad Caverns are not. They formed very differently. Mammoth Caves still holds the record for the longest cave system, and Carlsbad Caverns has one of the largest single room areas below ground. So these images here are of Mammoth Caves, one of the entrances there. I believe there was a question about Mammoth Caves and what I would do if I were there, best things to do. You can buy tickets in advance, and at Mammoth Caves, I really, really recommend plan ahead, buy your tickets online before you go. They do a longer, it's about a 4.5 hour trip through the cave system. If you go more in the winter months, when water levels are low, they'll take you even deeper into the cave than during the spring when it's wet and the water levels are slightly higher in the cave. So you can actually see more if you go during the off season. The great things about doing caves, they stay at about a fixed temperature. So they're between 52, 54 degrees, regardless of time of year. The problem with Mammoth Caves is it's what we call a wet system. There's a lot of moisture in the air. Even if you go during the summer, you're going to want to take layers because you might get really chilled being down in the cave. I mind temperature changes and I get chilled pretty easily. So I always carry layers when I'm going through Mammoth Caves. There is a shorter 2-hour hike that goes through there. And if you want to try spelunking, true caving, they actually have a wild cave tour. It is not something that I am interested in. I get a bit claustrophobic when it gets pretty small. And this is a park ranger led trip. There are body size requirements because they said there are places where you put your backpack in front of you and you're kind of screaming your way through the rocks. That would be the part where I'd be like, nope, I'm done. I'm out. Somebody else can do this. But if that is something that you are interested in, want to do it someplace where you're being led by a guide and they've done this tour many times, you can do the Wild Cave tour there. And that one's actually quite popular also. It's usually a half, if not a full day. And that is one I would definitely recommend if that's something you want to do. Look into all the requirements and make arrangements well in advance. Carlsbad Caverns, apparently the main complaint was it was poorly lit and just plain. I did not think so. So these are some images from Carlsbad Caverns. If anyone has been there, as you come out of Carlsbad, New Mexico, you drive south on the National Parks Highway to a town called White's City. There is nothing there. There are some accommodations and there's a little general store. And the last time I was there, there was like a 15-foot high alien because you're close to Roswell. So there's always that alien theme you'll see in different places. But the city is named after John White, who is imaged here. As a young child, he came across this cavern system, and it wasn't well known then. He did a lot of exploring, and he did a lot to help promote Carlsbad Caverns. So one way that you used to get down into the cavern was they put you in this big metal bucket, and they'd lower you down in. Because this cave is a dry system, things tend to not decay. So this image here of a ladder is another way that you used to be able to get into the cave. You would go up or down this ladder. I'm not sure I'd be a fan of either, but if I had to choose, I'd rather go down in the bucket than try a rickety looking ladder. This entrance here is the natural entrance. And it's a series of switchbacks, and it's almost a quarter of a mile, almost straight down. The trail, it's a series of switchbacks straight down in. This cave actually does have an elevator. So from the visitor center, you can actually take an elevator down into the cave, and you can take the elevator back up if you choose. Though when I was there, my ex was like, we hike all the time. I'm taking the elevator. And I was like, that's fine. I'm hiking in. And he caught up with me and we ended up walking in together. But coming out, he was like, I'm taking the elevator. And I was maybe a third of the way up and he caught up with me. And I was like, I thought you were taking the elevator. And he goes, yeah, it was 2 to 3 hour wait to get on the elevator. So he decided hiking out would be better than waiting for the elevator. So just be aware that you can get down pretty quickly, but depending on the queue, it can take you a long time to get a spot on the elevator to get back up. The other really amazing thing at Carlsbad Caverns, this area here is all for seats. And I don't know if you can see, but there's a big speaker right there. This is, as you come down the switchbacks, you look back up out this opening here. When you come down into the cave, you don't get very far in the cave and you make a really, really hard turn to the right. There is a cave opening off to the left, sort of straight ahead at that point. That is where the bats live. You are not allowed in that section. During the summer, when the bats are there, as it gets dusk, this is where you can sit. Park rangers come out and they talk about the bats and the colony and the well-being of the colony. Unfortunately, this colony has had some exposure to the white nose syndrome. So the colony is not as big as it used to be. But this speaker is hooked up to microphones in the bat cave. And when we were there, the park ranger talked for a while, and all of a sudden there was just deafening sound that came out of the speakers. And they let us know the bats were getting ready to, they were starting to move to come out to feed. And they told us, if you're really quiet, right, you can watch them come out. So what they do is when they come out of this opening, they form this tornado shape and they just come barreling up out of there. They get to this high area and then they just fly out in all different directions to feed for the night. Now, we were told the colony was not near as large as it had been. We sat there for a half an hour watching bats just pour out of this cave. It was absolutely spectacular. If you move around too much with their sonar, they kind of initially think you might be food and they would kind of dive down at the crowd. So they realized, nope, too big for something for me to eat. But that's something else that you can do. But when you come in from White City, it's a good 25-minute drive on roads to get up to the top of the mesa, as they call it, because the cave is actually down inside there. And then white sands. These are the largest white or gypsum dune fields in the world. If you get to Carlsbad Caverns, make the time to go up through Cloudcroft and down. If you have any interest in Billy the Kid, go through Lincoln National Forest. There's a whole town there, the town of Lincoln, that is sort of a walking museum. They have left a lot of the original buildings. You can walk through them. I've been through there. The old general store literally has stuff that was for sale at the time Billy the Kid was there. He was held in prison there. He broke out. They got him again. There was a trial. But there's amazing history that you can explore as you're moving from Carlsbad over to Alamogordo, where you can see at least 3 of the national parks in that area. And I love this, literally miles of white sand. Yes, because of the name of the park. This image here, these are the white sands. These are the snow caps. So White Sands National Park sits between 2 mountain chains. So if you come out of Carlsbad, you go up and over the Sacramentos through a beautiful town, Cloudcroft. It's a bit touristy for my taste, but there's great hiking up there. So we usually drive up into the mountains and hike and then come back out. Fossils at White Sands. They have footprints of giant sloths. The dire wolf, I cannot find an image of the dire wolf without something in its mouth. So a type of saber-toothed cat, mammoths, lions, and North American camels. In addition, they have human footprints there. It has one of the highest concentration of human footprints. Most places have a few sets. There are thousands of tracks of footprints, of human footprints at White Sands. And in the, when was it? I think last fall, there was a talk hosted by my Oxford Department of Geology, Environmental Earth Science. A couple geologists from the Geologic Survey gave a talk. They've been doing research with the National Park personnel at White Sands about these footprints, and they had just recently gotten dates back. These footprints date back to 22 to 23,000 years ago. So not only do they have the highest concentration of footprints there to date, they're some of the oldest known footprints there, but they've got tracks where they come across with sloths and a lot of the different animals. And part of the reason was at the time that these different groups were living there, there was actually a lot more water and moisture in that environment. So there was sort of like a watering hole, a very small, shallow lake there that they believe really drew a lot of all of these different animals, as well as the humans living in that region at that time, to that given area. So I think that is the last of my presentation. So questions?
Hi there, Tammie. I popped on and popped off. Here I am again. So I do have a couple questions, none of which were terribly specific to any one slide. So I sort of bankrolled them here for general information purposes. So Bob asks, is there a website, either a government website or maybe some other independent resource that will help folks make reservations for lodges within each of the national parks? Or is that pretty specific?
I think it's park specific. So if you want to stay at the lodges, say for Yellowstone, I would go to the Yellowstone site. To the best of my knowledge, those are run by the park system. And if they're run by contractors that are contracted with the national park, from what I've seen, all the information to make those reservations, the best place is to go through that particular park's website.
So really, in all these cases, as it relates to specific parks, it's just really best to do your due diligence, you know, to check into all the sort of frequently asked questions that are already out there and all the information that exists. You can probably get a fairly accurate picture.
That's my advice to anybody. Okay. I would put a lot of time in upfront planning. And some people are like, well, how early can I make reservations? You can make them years out. Depending on what park and what you want to do, you're going to need to make the reservations at least 12 months in advance. But that gives you lots of time to really, do due diligence to see all the things that you want to see, find out what's there that you might not even know, that it's like, oh my gosh, that would be great to see. You also have a connection with a geologist who loves the national parks. So I don't know, Molly, if we can share my, I may live to regret this, but my work email address. If you've got questions, I'm happy to try to help answer those. And feel free to reach out to the parks themselves. The park rangers, they get just as excited about their park as I can get about their parks. They are happy to help.
That's excellent advice. And thank you for that sort of 12 months ahead of time. I think that's a really good sort of target that we would want to put out there as a good time frame for planning ahead, or at the bare minimum.
At the bare minimum.
At the bare minimum. Okay, so here are a couple others that are specific to parks. Real quick, as a geologist, do you foresee a major volcanic eruption at Yellowstone anytime soon?
Will Yellowstone erupt again? Absolutely. In our lifetime, probably not. There's a lot of mixed information that's come out of Yellowstone. We know for a period of time, magma was moving into a shallow chamber because the surface of the earth was starting to inflate. And it was inflating at a rate of about, I think it was 1 centimeter per year over an extended period of time. And that had a lot of people starting to get a bit concerned about what actually was going on. That seems to have stopped, but it's kind of picked up again. Mm-hmm. But an imminent eruption, no, there's been no indication of that whatsoever geologically.
So don't not go to Yellowstone because
go to Yellowstone. You've got to go to Yellowstone. If you have not been to Yellowstone, for many reasons, you need to go to Yellowstone. But Yellowstone is massive. Part of it's in Idaho, Wyoming, and Montana. Now, there's just a sliver in Montana and a sliver in Idaho, but they've got it broken out in areas. So depending on what geothermal features or things you want to see, part of it could be in the south, part of it could be all the way up at the northern end. Yellowstone is a park that you want to be there for days to make sure you don't miss anything that you want to see. And have contingent plans. If the day you go, there's too many humans, then you've got Grand Tetons down the road. Craters of the Moon over in Idaho is, again, by Western travel standards, not that far away. There's lots to do in the area. So make plans to not only see that park, but you may get saturated of the park after a couple days, but there's still more you want to see. Go do something else for a day and then go back to the park. That's why also getting that annual pass, if you cannot get the senior pass, is absolutely the best way to do this.
Awesome. And somebody mentioned a military pass earlier. So just
military passes are another way to be able to get in. And I think those are, you pay for it once and it's good for life.
For life. Awesome. Let's see. You might be able to expand upon this. What kind of shoes do I need to walk on the dunes? Or perhaps we could refashion that question. What kind of shoes are best to just take on a national park trip?
I always wear hiking boots, and I wear good, sturdy hiking boots. I am of a generation where you could get boots that had soles stitched on, not glued on. And that's what I still try to go with. But I put in good money on my boots. I make sure they're broken in well before I go. I have a trick ankle, so I always get ones that come up high over my ankle. If you're going to be hiking out west in the summer, rattlers are something you need to be aware of. Because of the archaeology work that I do, I have snake guards. I've got hard plastic that's covered in canvas. They wrap around my leg and the top of my boot and they buckle on. If you're going to be hiking in Guadalupe's, areas like that where they've got that potential issue, the high boots and snake guards are ideal. Now, if you want to go out west and not deal with that, and I am not a snake person, I cannot stand them. They make me scream like a girl. If you go, once it's getting below freezing at night, the snakes no longer come out. Oh. I know it's awesome because when I'm doing archaeology work over winter break, I wear the snake guards to help with the vegetation, but I'm not wearing them because I'm worried about possibly running into a snake or getting near a bush that starts rattling or anything, unsettling like that.
It sounds like it could get dicey fast. So bottom line, leave your Old Navy flip-flops at home.
Oh, no flip-flops. No.
Okay, gotcha.
I was at Hawaii Volcanic, the park there. And they, in places there, depending on where it's flowing, you can get right up to the flow. I saw women in high heels. I saw people in flip-flops. And I'm just like, what are you doing? This is not how you should be here looking at this stuff.
Oh,
so durable shoes are always the best.
Awesome. That's good information, I think, all around. Okay, just a couple more. And then I think we probably are about at the end of our time. Considering visiting Death Valley, Greg he says, when's the best time to go? How long? And what kind of hiking options?
Death Valley has phenomenal hiking options. If you do not like the heat, do not go in the summer. They have temperatures that can get to 120, minimal fluid stops when you're there. I would go in the fall, maybe September, or April, May, before it's starting to get too hot. And depending on what you want to see, there's lots to see there. I would definitely, that's one that I would probably do 2 to 3 days at least. And there is lodging in Death Valley. So I would look at some of the different options for being able to stay there. And they had a museum that they were doing rehab work on. And I think that museum is now actually opened back up also. So those of us that remember borax, right, with the stagecoach and all the horses, a lot of borax mining was in that park. And so there's a lot of history about the borax mining in that area also.
Awesome. Well, there's a little tidbit I did not know.
I'm okay. A plethora of useless information.
There's a lot to know about the national park. So this is all fascinating information. Let's see, just a couple more. Any tips for winning the lottery, for getting a camping spot in the Grand Canyon?
No, just
No.
keep trying. Just keep trying. I have hiked part of the Bright Angel Trail. I went as far as the edge into the inner gorge. You can, if you are durable and you get up early, you can get all the way down to the river and out in one day. There are 2 water stops. They are on the switchbacks going in. If you're going to do it, make sure you're in good enough shape that you can carry enough fluid in and back out. My ex did not. We ran into an issue. I was sharing my fluids with him. I ended up in the ER with him because he got dehydrated. It was not a good experience for him. But there are only 2 water stops on the Bright Angel Trail. And they are, I think there's one at like the half mile and one at the 3/4. They're close together and they're right up near the rim. So if you're going to do a power hike down to the river, you've got to be in good enough shape to be able to carry lots of fluid in. The advantage is as you drink it as you're going in, your backpack gets lighter as you're coming back out.
Right. So this only reinforces to me why it is so important to really do your research. I mean, I would not want to send somebody sort of naive off on this trail adventure who didn't really understand what they were up against. Awesome. Okay, and then one final question. This is there's a book out by Connor Knighton, I think his name is, Leave Only Footprints. Have you heard of this, Tammie?
I know the philosophy, but I don't know the book. And the first place I came across this philosophy was when I was in New Zealand. And the philosophy is take only pictures, leave only footprints. It is a phenomenal philosophy. It is one that I've been raised as an outdoor person. We used to go camping for the entire month of August. We were just turned loose to do what we wanted to do. We had a base camp, there was 5 boats and that was about it. And we got to do what we wanted. But I've always been raised with that philosophy. So, and the bottom line for that philosophy is that any hikes that you do, any garbage that you generate goes back in your backpack. There were several questions about, how do we preserve these lands? You have to be responsible. I know when we're hiking, if we see garbage on trails, we pick it up and carry it out ourselves. I always carry an extra bag just for garbage. If you're worried about picking up somebody else's garbage, carry a rubber glove that you can put on, pick it up, put it in that pack. But the philosophy very much is that we leave minimal indication that we were there. So stay on the trails. Don't get off the trails. If there's a spur and it's not part of the marked trail, that's one that other people have done. If you use it, all you're doing is adding further damage. In a lot of the parks out west, what people don't realize is from living out east, if we do damage to the forest regrows and it kind of goes away. We don't really see it. When you scar the desert, that scar never goes away. So in the areas where I work in the well fields, where they did drilling back in the late 1800s and the damage they've done, it's still visible today. So be aware that certain environments, the impact that you have doesn't get erased over time. It's left there, lifetimes.
So don't leave what doesn't belong. Don't take what does.
Correct. Exactly.
Awesome. Okay. So before we wrap up, what is the one thing you want us to know before we leave?
That as many of the national park lands that you can get to, you should go to. The parks are absolutely amazing. And I am happy to answer any questions. Oh, and one other thing, if you've got interest in the local fossils, the day before Thanksgiving, I am leading a fossil hunting field trip that is open to the general public through the Passport to Programs. So you can sign up through that. We're going to meet at Route 1 over in Indiana. I will teach you about the local geology. I will give you all the tricks for finding the fossils. They're easy. This fossil looks like this piece of food. We all can relate to food. And then we turn you loose to hunt, and Geology Club, the Middletown Geology Club will be there. to help answer questions. So if you've got any interest in the local fossils, please, please, please sign up and join us. You will get an email that will have a map and a handout that you can print out and bring with you. But myself and my geology club will be there to help you identify anything you can find. And I cannot promise, but there are trilobites there, and there is the potential of finding them. So if you have ever wanted to find a trilobite, this is the outcrop to go to, and it is open year round. So come on my trip, learn all about it, and I'll give you the tips of which units to look at to find the trilobites, but I won't tell you unless you come on the trip. So that would be my parting thought. How about that?
Thank you, Tammie. Trilobite heads, this is your chance.
This is your chance.
It's your chance. Well, thank you so much. That's all the time we have for today. As a reminder, a recording of this presentation will be available on our website later today. Thank you again to Dr. Tammie Gerke for this presentation today. It is a beautiful, vast country, and we should definitely try to get out and see it. We appreciate you being here today. Please check out that passport program for fossil hunting if you're interested, and check out our other webinar presentations at alumlc.org/MiamiOH. Thank you all for joining us. Have a great day. Love and honor. Oh, she left. All right. Sweet.